Hi Lindsay, welcome. Are you okay?
Thank you. Yeah, all good.
Good.
All good.
So thank you so much for agreeing to have this chat with me about your experience as an early adopter practitioner in an early adopter school. So if we just start off, just tell me briefly, about your experience over that. Well, it's not really 12 months, is it? But over the last 8 months, 9 months, how have you found it?
Yeah. So I guess, I'd like to start really by just saying I've been in reception for kind of 10 years now, so my understanding on early years, my background knowledge on child development is kind of very strong. So coming into this year, I think because you've also been through so many changes, I think the first thing is just don't let it, I tried not to let it shock me. We just rolled with it. At the beginning of the year, we used the development matters from the old curriculum as well as getting to know the new ones. So the biggest thing that we kind of changed this year was more the assessment side, really.
Okay.
And looking at our curriculum a little bit more. So they were the two main, I would say, challenges for us this year.
Right. Okay.
In terms of the practice we had, in terms of how our baseline and how we settle the children, I didn't really change much.
Okay. Yeah, because you've got those systems were already established. Yeah, and that's the point about this, isn't it? In a way, is that we don't want people to make unnecessary changes. That's not what the framework's about. But there are some changes that we just have to get our heads around a little bit. So tell us about the changes, the little changes to your curriculum and the changes to your assessment. Tell us what you've done.
I'd probably say our curriculum now is just that little bit more tighter. Yeah, really. So previous to this, we used development matters. We worked our way through development matters. Yeah. Looking at the early learning goals and how we wanted to get children to those early learning goals. Whereas this year, it's kind of been a bit of a change in mindset. So at the beginning of the year, we spoke about, right, what children have we got coming to us? What do we want them to learn by the end of the year? And that's looking at all the areas of learning. So for PSCD, what are our expectations? Communication language, what are our expectations? And we kind of started there, really. Yeah. What do we want our children to reach by the end of the year? Yeah. Then we used the Lancashire Skills document. Yeah, great. So we really looked through that, unpicked that. We looked at development matters, the new development matters, because obviously that's your guide. Yes. So we looked at that. Yeah. And then we also looked at what do we want the children in our school to learn? And that's looking at, knowing what they need to learn in year one. So what would be good to get them, not get them ready for year one, but so they've got that good baseline to moving into year one. So we started that way, really, and then created our document. Yeah. Then obviously we baseline within the first 6 weeks. It takes us 6 weeks to baseline. Yeah. We teach straight away. We don't do teaching those 6 weeks, you know what I mean? We kind of do our maths and literacy baselines quicker than we would do PSCD, communication language, the arts, understand the world. So we start teaching, but we're always baselining, getting to know where the children are. And then we adapted the curriculum that little bit more because we know the children that little bit more. And then we know what their needs are. So that's how we kind of started. So at the beginning of the year, we looked at the curriculum in so much more detail. You kind of knew exactly, to some degree, where your year was going to go. Yeah. So for us, that was different because it was more detailed. Yeah. And then obviously we make sure that all children's interests throughout the year are fed into that. So that's where we started with. Yeah, and to be honest, that's what the Development Matters recommends, isn't it? That actually you identify what it is you want your children to learn and adapt your curriculum around that. But I think you're absolutely right when you talk about thinking about the end of the year and what you want for your children as well moving into year one. So and that would be how your curriculum would evolve, and the early learning goals are just a
summative assessment, aren't they? But actually really thinking about, well, what skills do we want our children at the end of reception to be able to have to move to help that smooth transition to year one was probably a good plan, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, no, it is. And I find now I'm not looking at the early learning goals as much as I did a couple of years ago, because you need to get it out of your head that you just need to teach the early learning goals. It's so much bigger than that. And I think that's the big thing. You know, give the children such a wide and varied curriculum. Don't limit it to just these early learning goals.
I mean, even though the early learning goals seem to be a little bit, particularly for something like understanding the world, they're a little bit more sort of subject focused, aren't they, in terms of science, history, geography. However, it's much broader than that, isn't it, in terms of the experiences and the opportunities you want your children to have, which is much broader than just that one sort of early learning goal. So did you involve other your subject leaders or the teachers in school, or have you not got to that point yet?
Not really. So I'm only just getting to that point now, really. So at the beginning of the year, I had to kind of get my head around it. I manage the nursery as well. So at the beginning of the year, I just looked at reception with my reception team, and there's only, you know, me, my job share, and RTA, and we really unpicked it together. And then I've only recently now started doing my staff training for nursery, and then my staff training for school. So what I've got coming up now is I'm going to meet with each subject lead, and we're going to look at each area for what's linked to their subject, and kind of talk through whether they agree with kind of what I've put in our curriculum map, really.
So one of the things there is not for people not to panic and not to rush, and everything doesn't have to be in place, does it, ready for the new framework in September? No,
absolutely not. And if some teachers have got time to meet up with subject leads, that's great, isn't it? But I think it's important to get your head around it as a teacher first, and it won't just be there. All of a sudden. It takes time, and next year we'll still be learning.
Absolutely. It is a journey. You're just a little bit further along that journey, I guess, aren't you, than schools who've not been early adopted schools. So what about your changes to assessment? What have you done there?
Assessment, we used to Tickler, Development Matters, and this time round, and I used to only do that each term. Whereas we're sitting down now as an early years team each half term.
Great.
And we talk about each child within each area of learning. And we say whether they're on track or not on track. For what we've taught that half term, where we want them to be that half term. So in my head, in your head, you're still thinking, are they going to be on track for the end of the year? But you need to be thinking, are they on track for what we've taught them? And the two do marry up a little bit, but it's not having that, it's having that forward plan in your head, but also thinking about the here and now.
Absolutely, because you've decided, haven't you, half termly, I guess, then what it is you want the children to learn. And so are they on track, or they're not on track? But like you said right at the beginning, you've already sort of worked backwards a little bit from what your expectations for the end of the end of reception, beginning of year one. And I guess what you'll start to do now when working with nursery is that you'll work back again. So what do we want the children to be going into reception with, and then work? Is that right? Is that what you will be doing now?
No, absolutely. And then so we've had that talk about on track, not on track, and then we then really home in on those not on track children, because what is it they're not on track on? Because it could be a little bit like we had a little girl it was 2 half terms ago that really struggled with a certain set of phonemes. So automatically I could quickly put that in place. And you would generally do that as a teacher anyway, but it did highlight certain things for us. So you're quickly able to fill your gaps just that little bit more. So then obviously your interventions or whatever you're going to do in continuous provision for those children that aren't on track are put in place straight away.
Yeah.
And she was then caught up by the next meeting when we had it, she was on track.
Yeah. And I think that's the point of this new framework as well, isn't it? It's really allowing us to really, and you said at the beginning about having that understanding of child development, that it's not linear, that, you know, some children do take, you know, they don't make any progress for a while and then suddenly they make lots of progress, or, you know, there's a bit of a diversion and they just need a little bit of help with this before then they can get back on track again. And I suppose it's about tuning into more carefully, isn't it, into those things that we need to put extra provision, whatever it might be, in place.
And that's why it's important as well to talk about each area of learning as a specific, because we had a child again this year who was quite strong in specific areas, but prime areas were really weak. Yeah. So again, it's just that balance, isn't it, and knowing, and it could be vice versa. The primes, you know, weak. So it's just knowing your child inside out. Yeah. And I think child development is massive in this new framework.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think it is something. It's that understanding, because even though whichever document, whether you use the Development Matters or the Birth to 5 Matters document, and I know it's set down in a linear way, it has to be. There's not as much detail in these new, particularly in the Development Matters. So we can't turn it into a checklist. We don't want to turn it into a checklist, and we're not able to do that because we would be missing massive stages in development, and also we would be missing teaching opportunities as well, wouldn't we? So yeah,
you would. And I think that is what my biggest advice when I've had teachers ask me about it is to know your child development and know your stages of play and what you would expect at different points in the year, in terms of communication and language, and like just imagination, how it moves from that quite simple ordinary play of like mummies and daddies to then into doctors and nurses, to then be able to create on fantasy, and where they've not experienced that role play, but they've actually got their imagination now that I can take on any fantasy character. And it's little things like that. If you kind of don't really know and understand those steps, it's going to be quite tricky to kind of get them to where.
Have you done anything this year that's helped with that sort of knowledge of child development, not necessarily for yourself but for your team? Is that something that you've looked at as a team as you've gone through the year?
So as a team, I don't know if it necessarily came about because of the early adopter year. We noticed that we just wanted to recap our child development anyway, and it probably did come about because of this. So we kind of looked at play theorists, social theorists, and this was across nursery and reception. And each staff member kind of took a different theorist or a different area to look into. And we also looked at early attachment theories and brain development, and kind of pulled it all together as a general resource then, and we shared it amongst staff, and actually our teaching staff across all school were interested in it as well and wanted to have a read. So we've done bits.
And that's about identifying if you've got any gaps in your knowledge of your staff, and so I suppose that comes in with like CPD, doesn't it, to get you to think about, well, what do our staff really need? Need to understand about the new framework and about the changes, but also what else is it have we got any gaps in our knowledge and understanding? What about your recording? Your recording evidence, because obviously that's a big change in the philosophy within the new framework, and what's been, I think it's always been there, not to collect lots of evidence, but because of the way that we've used Development Matters, we have done, haven't we? So what changes have you made there?
So I've probably never been an over collector, really, because I've always very much been about being with the children in the areas. So I've always obviously collected, and you had to have so much evidence for each different bits. So we've probably only reduced it slightly, where we're just capturing more wow moments where, I can see they've learnt that skill that we taught, new little snippets. Yeah, so I do still have a learning journey. We don't have online.
No, you don't have any electronics
or anything like that. No. So we just have our paper learning journeys, where we record, where we see the development progression. So we don't observe for observing's sake.
No,
we don't do any of that. When we're with the children and we're working in the areas, you know what children like, they come up to you and show you loads, don't they, as well?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. You couldn't possibly record it all, could you?
No. So we're just recording significant snapshots. We do use Class Dojo. I don't know if you've heard of
that. And that's for parents.
For parents. So we post, I post reminders, we post Star of the Week, but every now and again we might post, if we've had, we had a group of children really interested in singing, dancing, they were making their own musical instruments, we were performing, and that was such a wow moment for the class. We put up a load of pictures for parents to see, so we kind of involve parents a lot more that way, and more snapshots that way. But observations that we're taking are very just quite significant snapshots of the child's journey throughout time.
And that, and like you say, if that's not been a massive change for you because you've not been guilty of over collecting and over collecting evidence, then actually again for you that's just been a small tweak. And using your dojos for parents, because that's really important that we're doing that anyway. Absolutely. Having that information from parents and to parents, so that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So moving forward in terms of schools, who obviously all schools now who are not early adopters, have you got any bits of advice for them sort of generally in terms of how they would approach what's coming in the future?
I think the biggest one is, please don't get overwhelmed. I think you can go on there's some really good groups out there, as in like Facebook and all that. Facebook have got a really good early adopter one, but there's a lot of stuff that gets posted there that I even think, oh my goodness, like I don't do that. And it's just please don't get too overwhelmed with it. Start with your children at the beginning of the year. Look at where you want your children to be. If you feel that your child development's not up to scratch, just please spend some time, research. There's, I don't know if I can, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, he does a lot of really good training out there in terms of skill progression and child development based levels of play.
Absolutely.
Access training if you feel you need that, just to enhance your child development. There's so much reading you can do that.
I think there's a certain background that practitioners are going to have to do, so just getting your head around the framework and the development matters and etc. So but it's about not being overwhelmed, like you say, not panicking, isn't it? Because it doesn't all have to be ready for September.
Absolutely not. And there's a lot of skill progression documents out there that actually you could overburden yourself with. You can't possibly have a skill progression for every tiny little bit of child development.
And that's where your knowledge of child development comes in, because you don't need that. You don't need it in that detail. If you did, for example, if you had a child who was struggling with speech and language or physical skills, manipulation, then you would then go and search out some information to help you with that child, wouldn't you? But that's not for everybody, is it?
No. So I've got 2 children this year that I am doing more targeted tracking with, because they have got needs and they need it. And we need to just monitor those minuscule steps that they're taking. So there will be a need for that, but for the majority of the class, there's absolutely not. It's please spend time playing, getting down on the children's level, teaching whatever you're teaching that week, or in maths or literacy or whatever. Do as much as you're teaching as you can through your continuous provision and working with the children through play. So I think your biggest is just don't get overwhelmed. Get your head around child development, read through the development matters so you've got a rough overview of how children move and progress over the age range. Look at what you want your children to learn. Look at your curriculum, right? We want to do this in PSED and we want to do this in, you know, communication language or what have you. You know, you might have loads of books that you absolutely love. So look at what book will be good for different points of the, because a lot of the development matters or the curriculum is very much vocabulary, communication language based. So it's really about looking at that as well and how you can make your day as rich in vocab as possible. How your continuous provision can be rich in stimuli really for vocab that, you know, you'll start off just by having pictures, won't you, for them to discuss. And then you're going to start adding words, and then you're going to look at sentences. They see the progression themselves and, you know, what's going to spark their thoughts and curiosity. And yet in your curriculum, just look at what you want.
And it's your school, it's your opportunity, isn't it, to really make the best of the opportunities and experience for your children. And obviously every cohort's different, but even so, you will know your community and your school, and you will know what things generally that you want to cover as part of your curriculum, won't you? And
use what's out there as well. Don't try sitting there with a blank screen. You know, you don't need to do that.
Have you done any networking with anybody else, Lindsay? Have you done any networking with any other early adopter schools, or has it just been things that you've done yourself and then within your own school?
Majority so far. Majority because COVID hasn't really helped the whole situation.
No, true.
Adopter schools. So there's a local school to me where I met up with her a few times at the beginning of the year, and we spoke about different bits, and then obviously I've been involved in bits with yourself as well this year, which has provided me time to talk to others, which has been beneficial. So again, anyone new to it, get in contact with in the local settings, because the other thing we're going to find is moderation is no longer, is it? So I would really promote to make up local cluster group moderations. You know, we've not been able to do as much of that as we wanted this year, but you know, that's something that we did prior to this change. We had a group of local schools that we would meet up with quite regularly and just talk about different areas of learning. And
I think that's a really good piece of advice, isn't it? Because then, even though you know that you will still want to do some moderation, you know, within your own school and again across clusters, and it's really important to network, isn't it? In relation,
especially if you're in your one form entry school and there's only one reception teacher. You can have bigger schools that you can have 2, 3, 4 reception classes. That's great, but when you're at a small school, absolutely just go and mix, because you also don't want to get kind of stuck in your way as well. If you don't kind of talk to other schools about how other children of that age range are developing, how do you know actually what you're assessing is correct as well?
And it's great just to have conversations with other people, to bounce ideas and say, oh, what a really good idea, I haven't thought about that. I mean, and again, there's that sort of fine line between not becoming overwhelmed and thinking, well, I don't really know what I'm doing and I don't know anything, to actually just taking those small steps and thinking about, okay, that's my first plan, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that, and in the meantime chat with other people. That's why we particularly wanted to do these little interview chats with schools, just to try and reassure people that actually not everything has to be in place for September. And it is a journey that we're on, isn't it?
And that it will take time. You need at least your full year to get all your new things, you know, out on the way. And if you are a new teacher, new to reception, use your subject leads to support you.
I think that's a good idea as well, isn't it?
They know their subject. And yes, they might not be, you know, massive on early years, but they'll be able to tell you, well, actually, this is what our Key Stage 1 children learn about. So how could we maybe look at what reception would need to be able to kind of move into that area? And you've got your educational programme, that's what we have to follow in
absolutely, because that's statutory, isn't it? So we've got to, it's very broad, but it just gives us that broad sort of idea of the experiences we need to be providing.
So you have that there. You've obviously got your development matters as a little guide, whatever other, you know, curriculum support programs you might have. The Lancashire one I just found really, really, really useful. And then
we just unpicked some of the skills with that, didn't we, really? So we've just unpicked some of the skills, and when you were talking about your subject leaders before, I think that that planning for learning document that we've produced, it just breaks it down a little bit. So you've got sort of your history skills, your geography skills, and your science skills under understanding the world. But it's still in early years, it's still the skills, concepts and knowledge that we would expect within, you know, an early years classroom, but also keeping your eye on what children are expected to do when they move to year
and
one.
also not forget, I think that one of the things that could potentially happen with this, because you are quite curriculum focused, is not to forget that actually children's interests still matter massively, and don't be afraid to still go with children's interests. You can still meet your skill whichever way it goes, but you might have an idea that you want to go. So we've just been doing life cycles, and we started looking at plants, and we planted our broad beans, and we've been monitoring them, and you know, they're at home now, but the children are still sending all these pictures in through Dojo. So excited about how tall their broad beans are growing. Then we got caterpillars, and we started looking at life cycles, and I'm currently pregnant. So then they were just so amazed. We had to then look onto the human life cycle. And then that's the way that they wanted to go.
It's still the same skills. It's still conversation skills, you know, describing, explaining what they've noticed. It's still the same skills, but the context is something that they're interested in.
So we could have carried on, you know, that caterpillar life cycle, looked at the chicken and the egg and what have you. But actually, the learning we got out of looking at the human life cycle alone, and how, you know, we talked about then what a baby's like. Well, actually, then a toddler, and how a toddler moves, and then well, actually when we get old, what happens, and you know, well, our teeth might fall out when we're old. So we, you know, it gets on to all of that, and you know, you do get the touchy subjects of, well, how was the baby made, and it's all part of you know, understanding the world, isn't it? And
they're asking questions, they're interested, and that's what curious, you know, that awe and wonder, that's what young children are about. And like you say, if we can tap into what they're particularly interested in, then we don't need to think about the questions, because they will come up with them themselves, won't they?
They will. They absolutely will.
Oh, they're going to be able to follow you all the way through, Lindsay.
We can't wait for tomorrow for my scan, because they get to see the baby again.
Yeah, fantastic. And then obviously they can follow you on your journey when the baby arrives. That's great. So then you can have another. There's another part there of the curriculum there, isn't there, in looking after a baby and etc. etc.
Absolutely. And you know, if you know, I could have quite easily gone down, no, this is what I had mapped out, we're going to go this way and this way and this way, but actually the learning and the vocabulary and the talking, and like you're saying, the questions that they were asking was, you know, was out of this world, but we still met what I wanted to learn. It's
still the skills and the knowledge and the concepts. It's just actually the context is just slightly different, isn't it? And then, you know, once they've got that understanding, you know, they might, you know, if even at home they might be, you know, interested in life cycles of frogs if they go on a walk or whatever, and that's still there, isn't it? It's still that the skills are still the same. It's just
and you'll still link, you know, absolutely, and you still link into that, because then they were like, well, was the chicken lays an egg, so did you have an egg like that inside yours? So you talk about, no, it's different eggs.
Well, but they're coming at it from a 4 or 5 year old, aren't they? So, you know, when you're answering the questions, you're answering 4 and 5 year olds as to what, you know, what knowledge they can sort of cope with at that particular time. So, it's great.
Absolutely. And then you've got I know, because we're quite rural where we are, so we've got a child in class as well who's lives on a farm. So is around sheep being bought, you know, when lambing, and he helps with lambing. So the tools that you get from that, so again, that's just isn't it, understanding your social culture of your children.
Absolutely. And bringing that on board as well. So some children will not have that experience, but if they have, then obviously that helps that child as well to share their experiences with everybody else in the class. Wow, you've had a great year, haven't you? Fantastic. Thank you so much. So was there anything particular that you've read or anything? So you talked about the child development and theories, which is particular to your school. Is there any sort of one bit of information or, you know, websites, or is there anything?
No, the general discussions from like kind of Facebook, obviously all the Julian stuff that he's published, 100%.
Julian Grenier's book, absolutely.
And you know, he's done a lot of podcasts and things. So I definitely would listen to that. But you're gonna learn the most by doing it. And until you're in it, you're doing it. That is when you're gonna really start getting
what it's about. So it's reading that background. I mean, I, like yourself, have listened to a lot of the videos and things. There's lots around on YouTube, as well as reading. But like you say, it's actually doing it in practice in your school that's where it's going to make a lot of sense, and that's when you can start to make those purposeful decisions.
Absolutely. And like I said before, if you're new to reception, please use your subject leaders as well, just to help you out. And fantastic. Thank you so much, Lindsay.